friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Totally Awesome Swan Soiree and Scootin' By stamp sets. Just using the little gift from that one, so any set with a little gift would work. As usual, I've stamped my images with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock. I also stamped the pond from Swan Soiree in Salvage Patina Distress Oxide ink. So I'm going to jump into my Copic coloring. I'm going to start with my frogs, and for them I'm using YG11, YG13, and YG17. Taking the YG17 and laying in my shadows wherever I want them to go, on his forearms where his head is overlapping that, and then a little bit along the sides of his head and body, and then blending out with the YG13. Just making sure to go over the edge of that YG17 and break up that line, because there is quite a bit of difference between those shades, but they still blend really well. And then I'm going to jump to the YG11 for my mid-tone and blend out the highlighted areas. And I will do a second layer off screen just to save some time during the video, but I'm just going to go over exactly what I've already done to smooth everything out and just build up that saturation a bit. For the little guy, I'm going to use the same exact shades. I'm going to skip over his tummy. I'm going to do that in some other colors later on, but I'm just going to continue to blend out in the same way that I did for the big guy. I want them to be matching so that they look like a little family. And then I'm going to move on to his little spots. I colored those in with the YG17, and then I added some dot detail along his haunches and on his forehead and cheeks. And I'm going to do the same on the little guy. And this is kind of like a subtle look because I use the same shade, so I wanted to darken that up a bit. And I'm going to add in G46 for that, and just use the very tip of my marker so I can get super fine little dots so that he has those little freckles. So I will also color in the three that are on his hindquarters with that shade, again, just to deepen those up a bit. I even gave him some little freckles on his feet. And I'm going to do the same for the little guy, just not quite as many since he's a lot smaller and I don't want it to get, too overwhelmed. Then I'm going to move to the rosy cheeks. I'll use R11 and R20 for that. I pulled out my R22 as well because I'm going to be using that in the next image. But first I'm going to do those rosy cheeks just by adding the R20 and then tracing around the edges with the R11. And then I'll do the bow on my birthday gift, starting with the R22. Blending up with the R20 and then finishing with the R11. I'm also going to color the water lilies with the lighter two shades. I'm using the R20 to just outline the underside of each of the petals. I'm going to do that on both the larger and the smaller one. And then I'll use the R11 to begin to blend that out. I was going to let that just fade into the white cardstock, but it still felt like it wasn't quite enough of a transition there. So I did grab in the R000, which is super pale, and that just softened up the edge of that and made it look a little bit softer and more feminine, I guess. Which is funny because I'm making a masculine card, but couldn't resist those water lilies. I guess that helps it lean a little bit towards the gender neutral vibe anyway then. So I'm moving on to my cattails, and for the grassy areas I'm going to use G14, G16, and G19. I have a lot of cattails growing in my backyard, so I actually just took a peek out my window that I film in front of and kind of gauged the color palette from that, and they were like a more vibrant green than I was expecting. I thought they might be more olivey toned, but no, they were a nice bright green. So these are the colors that I chose. And I'm using the G19 first. on most of them, but I did use a few that I just started with the G16 just for a little bit of variety. And then I'm using the G14 for the lightest. And then for the tops, I'm going to use E44, E47, and E49. So I'll just add a little bit of that E49, kind of like did it in the direction that they're leaning, and then blend it up with the E47. Still leaving a lot of room for the highlight shade because I didn't want them to get too dark. So next I'll bring in that E44 and just make sure to blend the E47 out so it looks nice and soft and furry like cattails do, or corn dogs as my youngest son calls them. And then I took away the E49 and added in the E43, and I'm going to do the log. I decided to keep it pretty simple with the color palette by not changing up the browns, but I didn't want it to look too much like the cattails, so that's why I decided to go with a slightly lighter like interpretation of the previous shades. So I used that E47 to add some lines wherever they were drawn by the artist to just really emphasize those. And then I'm going to go over that with the E44, making sure to save room for that lightest shade, the E43, because I really want to have that texture be evident. So just quickly going over the lightest areas. And I really like how that turned out. So then I forgot to stamp out the little dragonflies. So I just paused the video briefly to stamp those out because I wanted to use this color palette that I'm using on the gift on them as well. And that is B21, B24, and B29. Started at the bottom with the B29, and then I'm blending up with the B24, finishing with the B21, and then I went back and added a bit more of that B24 and the B21. And then I'm going to color the dragonflies. The first one I went a little bit farther than I meant to with the B29, so I ended up just filling it in with the B24. But I prefer the way that I colored the other two with all three shades. It's not a big deal because I know I'm going to add stickles to them later on, so it's going to cover up a lot of the coloring anyway. But for the other two, I'm using the B29 first, closest to the body, and then blending out with the B24, and then using that B21 right on the tips where I wanted them to be lighter. And I did color over the stamped body of that one just because it wasn't stamped down perfectly. It wasn't quite dark enough. So I just used that darker color to kind of make it look like it was as dark as the other two. I had to move the marker caps off to the side so I could get to this last little guy. Just colored him exactly the same. And now that my gift has dried, I'm going to go back in with my B29 and just add some polka dots to that so it looks like gift wrap. For the water lilies, I wanted to go in a different direction with the greens, so I decided to do more of like a yellow green, and I picked YG21, YG23, and YG25. I wanted each of the green objects to kind of stand on their own and not just look all the same, especially the frogs from their surrounding images, so that's why I decided to go with some different tones. And I'm just coloring with the YG25 on the outside and then blending out with the YG23 and then the YG21 on the other end. And that one that I just finished coloring, I just stamped that twice and turned it in the other direction to make it look a little bit different. For the frog's tummy, I use YG00 and YG03, and then I trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm using a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock. I'm going to blend on some Salvage Patina Distress Oxide ink. And I'm laying that on pretty heavily because I know that quite a lot of that is going to get covered up with the next shade. So I'm just going to bring that in from all four corners. I want the center to be lighter and the outside edges to be nice and dark and create a nice vignette. So I'm just going to color that in using those blending tools and that beautiful shade of Distress Oxide ink. I think this has quickly become my favorite shade of Distress Oxide. Then I'm going to darken that up with some peacock feathers, and I'm going to bring that in the same direction, bringing that almost the whole way up to the edge of the salvage patina in the center there. But I'm going to go back to the salvage patina in just a second. So just going to make sure that I have a nice dark outline on the outside edges. And then I'm going to go back to that salvage patina, like I said, and just bring that in, just holding it down carefully in the center. Although really you don't have to, as long as you have it kind of wedged to the bottom or a corner of the mat, it kind of stays in place. So I'm going to fill that in so that that center stays lighter, like I mentioned. And then I wanted to add some splatter detail, so I'm going to grab an acrylic block and just press my colors onto that because there wasn't a lot of room on the mat anymore for those. So just added a bit of water to them. I'm going to do the salvage patina first, just flicking it off the edge of the block with a fine paintbrush. And then I can go straight into the peacock feathers without even cleaning the brush, since I'm going from a lighter color to a darker, and adding those splatters. And I added a bit more water because there wasn't a lot of flow left on that block. Then I'm going to take the Simple Stripes Landscape and run that through my die cutting machine. I'm going to separate out those stripes, and I'm going to add some more ink to the outer two and the center stripe. So I'm just going to lay those out, and then I'm going to grab another color of Distress Oxide. I'm going to use Blueprint Sketch because I want to really deepen these up and add a nice dark blue edge. So I'm going to bring that in from the corners and the sides. I'm pressing really lightly because I didn't want it to get super bold, because I didn't want to have to blend it out with the other two shades, because I would lose all of that splatter detail if I did that. So just carefully blending that on using light pressure so it kind of just blends on its own. And then for the center one, I'm only going to do the top and bottom, still kind of trying to mimic that kind of circular outline in the center, making the dark ring around the outer edges. And then I'll just do the last little stripe here and make sure that I do it in the opposite direction from the first one so that it's kind of like a bookend and everything matches really nicely and still will look great all together. So I'm just carefully blending that on nice and soft, and then I go back and darken up the very edges so it really makes that stitching detail pop. And then I'm going to bring all 5 of my stripes back in so that I can do some splatter detail with the Blueprint Sketch as well. I wanted to have some of that on all of them to just tie the whole thing together. And this time I used even more water, so I got some larger size droplets as well, but that's totally fine. I like a mix of the sizes. So I am going to just wipe up that one over there. I felt like that one was a little bit too big, so I just dabbed up, a couple of them. And then I took a stitched circle stackable. This is the largest of the small version, and I'm going to blend on some more salvage patina on another piece of Bristol and just bring it around the outside edges. I want this to be really soft. This time I'm going to leave the center completely white. And then I need a little bit of grass at the bottom of my scene. So I'm going to bring in some twisted citron and blend that on as well. I don't need it to go up very far because most of that will get covered up anyway. And then I wanted to just darken that up a tiny bit, so I grabbed some mowed lawn and just went very softly over the very edge of that and then blended that back out. So I set all of that stuff aside to dry, and once it was ready, I could go ahead and begin assembling. So I'm going to take these 5 stripes and I'm going to adhere them to my card front, which I made out of a piece of Blue Jay cardstock from Lawn Fawn. I just scored and folded it to a standard A2 size card, so it's 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. So I arranged the stripes off to the side in order of how I want to add them to the card, and then I'm doing that with my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue. It has that super fine nozzle that I have really come to love, so you get a super thin bead of glue. So it's great for all kinds of images, but I basically have been using it for everything lately. So once I have the last piece on there, I'm just going to make sure that everything is straight and pressed nicely together. It all lines up nicely with the outside edge. And then I will take my focal panel. I've added some foam tape to the back of that so I can pop it up in the center of my card. I'm going to do it a little bit high of center and press that down into place, and then I'll bring in my images. So we're ready to decorate. And I'm going to grab that pond first, and I'm going to add that right over where the grass meets the sky, and let that just hang over the focal panel just the slightest bit. And then in front of that, I'm going to add the log. So that's going to just push that pond back a little bit further into the distance in our scene. And then I'm going to work very quickly here because this glue dries much faster than my typical Tombow Mono Multi that I used to use. So you really have to work quick. I wanted to tuck those cattails behind the pond, so I had to kind of peel that up because it was already pretty firmly glued down. So I added the 2 cluster on the left and then the taller one over on the right. And then I'm going to add the other single one over on the right as well, so I have balance there. And then I'm going to take the 2 little grassy clusters, and I'll add 1 on each side. So one of those is from Totally Awesome, and one of them is from Swan Soiree. And I love that it's basically the same image in reverse, so you can use them both, and they really create balance on a card, which, you know, is something that I just happen to love. So I'm going to take the larger of the lily pads, and I'm going to add 1 on each side once again for balance. But you don't want things to be too matchy-matchy, so that's why I stamped the 3rd, which I'm going to use that little one over on the left. And then I'm going to take my jumping frog, and that's going to help me fill up a lot of the empty space in the sky. He's going to be leaping into our scene here to wish our little other frog happy birthday. So I'm going to put him on the lily pad on the right, and then tuck this large water lily right in front of that, kind of between the log and the frog on his lily pad. So again, it's just creating more depth in the scene because we've got layers of things pushing back into the distance. I add the small gift to the small lily pad and the small water lily right in front of that. So again, those 2 things are kind of balancing out the larger lily pad. Then I'm going to take some cilantro cardstock and die cut the Scripty Hello die from that. The rest of the sentiment I'm going to heat emboss onto a piece of Blue Jay cardstock again. So I'm just treating that with my EK Success powder tool so I don't get any static cling on there. And then I will ink up my sentiment with some Versamark ink. It's just a clear sticky ink that grabs onto that embossing powder so that you have time to heat set it. So I stamp that out twice and press down lightly to get a nice clear impression. And then I'm going to coat that with some Lawn Fawn white embossing powder, tap off the excess from the back, and then I will grab my heat tool. I let it heat up to the side for about 30 seconds, and then I like to bring it to the back and then the front until everything is nice and white and melted. And as soon as that is cool to the touch, I will take a microfiber cloth and buff off any remaining powder. That cloth is from Pink and Main. Since my card base is pretty much too dark to stamp on, I'm going to make an insert for the inside instead. I cut out a piece of white cardstock with the outside in stitch rectangle stackables, and I'm stamping in Blue Jay ink, and I did the other little frog and the cattails and You're Totally Awesome. And so now I am ready to assemble the final pieces of my card. I'm going to take that insert and add some glue to the outer edges and make sure that that is centered on the inside of my card. Smooth that down, and then I can add my final sentiment pieces. I've added a bit of foam tape to the bottom of the word hello so that I can pop that up also on the H and the O where it's going to be hanging off the edge of the focal panel. I'm going to layer that right on top of the log and make sure I have it right where I want it, and then press that down. And I trimmed out the embossed part of the sentiment with one of the everyday sentiment banners. I'm going to clip that on one end so it's a little bit shorter and add a bit of foam tape to the back of that so that could be popped up as well. And then I will add that right below the hello. I just tucked the very top of that banner under the very edge of the hello scripty sentiment. Then I have my 3 little dragonflies. This one is going to also hang over the edge of the focal point, so I added some foam tape on one side and liquid glue on the other. I'm going to add that just above the hello, the O, and then the other 2 I'm going to add in the sky. I'm going to put this one over here on the right hand side, kind of filling in that blank space, and then the last one is going to be hovering right near the cattails on the left. To finish off the card, I wanted to add a tiny bit of sparkle, like I mentioned, to my dragonfly's wings. So I just squeezed out a tiny bit and spread that around with the nozzle so that it coated the wings where they are the darkest. And that is going to complete my card for today. So I'm going to lift that up to the camera so you can see how that stickles looks when you tip it in the light. And there is another peek at the inside. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I had so much fun creating this card. It's really different for me, but I really had fun with it. So I hope you like it too. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I post new ones twice a week on Mondays and Fridays. If you're interested in the products I use, you'll find them linked down below in the description bar. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also be interested in. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.